Welcome to Planet Lex, the podcast of Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, bringing it to you from Chicago, Illinois.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of Northwestern Law's Planet Lex. We are podcasting for the very first time in front of a live audience from Northwestern University's San Francisco campus. And we have a really great couple of tech lawyers with us here. Joining me today is Myra Pasek, General Counsel for Ouster, a San Francisco company bringing lidar 3D solutions to multiple industries, and Pete Klein, who's the Associate Director of Legal at Twitter. Prior to her work at Ouster, Myra was the first ever General Counsel for Impossible Foods, and before that, Associate General Counsel at Tesla. So Tesla, Impossible Foods, and now Ouster. Her legal expertise includes venture and debt funding, patent and trademark strategy, contract negotiation and litigation. Myra is a 1990 graduate of Northwestern Law School, and she won the 2019 Distinguished Entrepreneur Law Award from our own Donald Pritzker Entrepreneurship Law Center. Pete, as I mentioned, is a commercial attorney at Twitter, working on the advertising side of the business. Pete's been at Twitter for over 5 years. Before that, Pete worked at Flurry, a mobile analytics and ad tech company, words I know how to say, but I'm not sure how any of that is done, which he helped to sell to Yahoo in 2014. Pete is a Northwestern graduate as well, graduating in 2008. Myra, Pete, thanks so much for being here today.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So before jumping into current issues happening in Silicon Valley, I want to take a couple minutes and talk about your path into working in tech companies, working in startups, because each of you worked at big law firms before you worked in the tech industry. Myra at Latham and Watkins and at Orrick, I believe, and Pete, you also worked at Latham and Watkins. Can you speak a little bit to starting out there, what a difference it might have made to start out in big law, and what the transition was like between the two?
I started out at Latham and Watkins. I was lucky to get out of law school in 1990 when it was a really big boom economy. But I think the training you get in big law is just irreplaceable. I don't think I could do what I do now if I had not gone to big law and worked there. I probably was in big law for about 15 years. Big law has a lot of resources. All they do is law, and they have to do it better than anyone else, or no one would hire them for one thing, and they'd get sued for malpractice. So you become a very, very, very good lawyer at big firms. So I highly recommend going the big firm route first. And transitioning is, I didn't think about it when I was doing it, but I think the rigor that you have to analyze things in a big firm helps you dig into new problems that you didn't have to solve because you usually specialize in big law, but it just gives you that skill set to be able to dig into it and figure things out and make sure you're doing things right. So that's what I would say about it.
How about you, Pete?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Myra said. When I was at Latham, I was a litigator. Now I'm on the commercial side, and so I'm actually conceptually quite far away from litigating now. So kind of a lot of the skills, the substantive tools, and the kind of trade-like stuff that I was learning when I was at the firm are not things that I use that much these days, to be honest. But I think, to echo what you were saying, I learned a lot about how to work. I learned a lot about how to approach it. I think that big law firms are quite demanding places, as it turns out. They teach you how to work in what can be high-stress environments at times, and they expect an incredibly high quality of the output of your work product. And that's stuff that stuck with me and served me really well since then. I think as far as the transition, I felt like it was a real kind of shock to the senses. I went from a big law firm to a startup. We had about probably about 80 people actually when I started at Flurry. And it was absolutely kind of appalling to me, the breadth of things that they wanted me to do. I did commercial work, I did product counseling, I worked on employment issues, corporate governance, I helped us raise rounds of financing. I managed our patent portfolio. That is a terrible idea. If you have a patent portfolio, you should not let me anywhere near it, I can tell you. But it was crazy fun. It was so challenging, and I learned so much. And believe it or not, one of the things that I really want to stump for here tonight, especially for young attorneys thinking about going down the in-house path, is that going and working at a small company in particular is just so great. And it's experience that I really don't think you can quite match anywhere else. So I was a huge fan of it ultimately, but the first 6 or so months there, I would say I've never felt dumber. And I have frequently felt dumb.
I don't recall that. But in any event, Myra, you said that Big Law does law better than anyone else because they have to get hired, right? And they do focus on law. But as a startup lawyer, aren't you doing law and, right? You're in the mix, as Pete was saying, doing a million different things inside the company. Is that a big part of the transition?
It is.
But let me put it this way. You mentioned that Big Law focuses on doing law better than anyone else, right? But one of the stories that you often hear about lawyers at small companies and tech companies is that they're much more involved in the business. They're much more involved in the tech. They're much more involved in the broad range of issues that I mentioned your expertise in and that Pete mentioned doing across the business. Is that a big part of the transition, or is that just a myth we tell ourselves about how lawyers operate in different enterprises?
Well, I think you're a great lawyer in different ways. I mean, when you're an outside lawyer, you don't really live and breathe what the company's doing. So you can't possibly be as good, in terms of being a tailored lawyer to the company. And you just don't know you don't know the company as well as someone who's in-house. I mean, that doesn't hold true for a litigator. They probably know better what they're doing than somebody in-house, just because litigation is such an odd practice and it's focused outside of the company. But in terms of being inside versus outside, you get to know the people, you get to know the founders, you get to know what's important to them. You are usually less risk averse than an outside lawyer could be. And that allows your client to grow faster and do more than they could do if they were just dealing with outside lawyers who would be advising them not to do a lot of things. So it is a different skill set, but having gone through the rigors of being an outside lawyer, I think it prepares you really well to deal with being an inside lawyer, where you have to be really nimble and you have to be able to have really good judgment and kind of navigate problems of the business rather than just navigate legal problems.
You mentioned risk aversion, and another of those stories that we often say is that lawyers are trained to avoid risk, to counsel companies to avoid risk, which doesn't strike me as the mindset inside, particularly the kinds of early stage companies that you both have worked for. Is that a truth? And if so, how do you make that shift? How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think that over time, what I've come to think of as the key value add of an in-house lawyer is how to help the business choose to take on the right risks. You start, and I do think that Myra is exactly right. When you come out of a law firm, you do tend to have a more risk-averse point of view. That tends to be your primary objective, is to kind of eliminate risk if at all possible. But I think that over time, you do come to work with the business and choose to help them push forward in the smart ways. And you want to be looking at your company as a portfolio of legal risk and opportunities. And what you're really trying to do is help them push forward to capture the biggest upside with the lowest downside. So it's take the right risks.
Both of you have been parts of companies that have gone from small to really knock it out of the park, whether it's Tesla or Impossible or Pete. In the 5 years you've been at Twitter, that company has changed enormously. How do those things change as the size, the reach, the scope of the company change, or do they really not?
Well, I think we would have very different views of that, just because Pete's in software and I've pretty much solely been in companies that actually build something real. So
sounds terrible.
I didn't mean that as an insult. Physical, I should say. So if you're building a car, or you're making food, or you're making a lidar sensor, you have to actually scale up a physical product. And so the company changes really dramatically when it goes from an R&D operation where you don't have a product that you're selling yet, and when you actually design a product and then need to build it and scale it up and sell it. And I went into both Impossible Foods and Tesla before any product was being sold, which is a real luxury because you can really get the legal department organized before the commercial stuff hits. Went into Ouster after they were already selling product. It was much more challenging because a lot of things, in my view, had not been done optimally in the commercial side, and I had to kind of fix that at the same time as trying to get on top of everything else. But yeah, in a manufacturing environment, the type of workforce changes. You have people who work in the factory, the employment problems change, the headcount goes through the roof, you might have multiple sites, and you just have different problems because you're starting to sell, you may be starting to sell internationally. The work just kind of explodes, and it's really fun.
Yeah, I think that I would add a few twists on that based on the software take. I think that's a really good point. It seems very hard to work at a company that sells actual products. I couldn't recommend it to anyone. Working in virtual products is in some ways much easier. You never have this kind of scale problem. You don't work with factories that I know of. But you face a lot of different challenges instead. I think one of them that we're grappling with, that many companies are grappling with, is that when you have an app in an app store, you're almost immediately a global company. Your product's available around the planet, and that's places that people can not only download it, but then they can take their phone with them wherever they go afterwards. And so suddenly you find yourself subject to laws in all sorts of jurisdictions that may not have been top of mind, but they can become top of mind pretty quickly. And so I think that when you're in a position like Twitter is, where you're in the public eye kind of a lot, and from my view, we kind of punch above our weight relative to the actual size of our company. People love to talk about Google and Twitter and Facebook, and I'm like, Twitter is like 1/20th the size of Facebook and 1/40th the size of Google. I mean, the size differences here are astronomical, but we are still subject to these same global laws, and we are still gaining.
142 characters that is, keeping you relatively small.
I've long thought that. I agree. I'll pass that along. But no, I mean, that's challenging stuff, and we have been the subject of a lot of attention over the last few years, and life's not getting easier on that front, that's for sure.
So there's really a reality to this notion that because it's a software or because it's an app, that scale happens instantaneously, or it can happen instantly. You don't have to build factories to ramp up the number of Teslas that you're getting into people's hands.
Sure. I mean, I think that the truth is that as much as possible, you want that kind of scale to happen seamlessly. Of course, behind the scenes, you have very practical issues like data centers and that sort of thing. Twitter famously for years had this little cartoon thing called the fail whale that would always come up when Twitter would collapse because too many people were using Twitter. We don't have that problem anymore, which maybe is a different problem. But, you do have these issues around scale. And let's keep in mind, a lot of this still is powered by human beings who are doing things like checking content in ads and doing that sort of thing. Now, they're not doing it all the time, and as much as possible, you want to be eliminating that, streamlining it, and using technology. But at the end of the day, it still takes a lot of people to run a company like this. It's sometimes surprising to people when they learn things like Google has over 100,000 employees. It's a lot of people.
Yeah, it is a lot of people. I think I know at least a little bit about how Twitter works because I'm a Twitter user. Well, I know how Twitter appears to consumers. Myra, I want to ask you to tell us a little more about the physical company that you're working with now, Ouster. And lidar you once described as something that sees the environment like the human eye, except anything the eye can do, lidar can do better.
That's a bit of an exaggeration, but...
Okay. This is a podcast, so that's a good thing. My understanding is that, the application we always think about is self-driving cars, although it's a fundamental sort of machine vision that can be in a lot of industries. Can you say a little bit about what it's done and what the sort of legal issues are that are cropping up on your desk, driven by being in a lidar company?
Lidar is used in all kinds of industries. Like if you think about automating, like Amazon automating its warehouse with a robot to go get the product so that it can be packed up and shipped within the 2-day shipping. You need different types of eyes that can see differently for whichever application you're looking at. So there's different models. Like there'll be a short range with a very, very wide field of view, so it can see up to the top shelf of the warehouse, the Amazon warehouse. There's a very narrow field of view that can see really far, so that if you're in a car going very fast down a freeway, if there's something way up there that you're going to come upon very quickly because you're moving so fast, you'll see it in time to be able to stop. And then there's just kind of the mid-range, which is really good, for example, in, like city driving, if you want to see just generally things that are within the range of being able to stop at 30 miles an hour. But people put Ouster's lidar on drones. It's the first company that made them small enough and light enough to be able to be flown on a drone. So we have customers who are flying them into mines and mapping the mine so that they don't have to put human life at danger going down into an unknown cave or something deep or something dangerous. We have people using them in environmental applications to catch poachers who are coming on to kill elephants for their tusks, and you can see if there's people or things where they're supposed to be or not supposed to be. And one of the reasons I would say it's better than the human eye is that lidar can tell you exactly how far away any object is. Exactly. Like I can estimate that the front row is maybe 6 feet away or 7 feet away, but lidar will tell you exactly how far every object is, and it will tell you how dense it is, and it will even be able eventually to tell you what color it is, which is why lidar and cameras are going to merge, I think, eventually.
So what are the legal issues that are
legal issues? It just runs the gamut. I mean, you've got all the normal legal issues that you would have in any kind of manufacturing company, any kind of business. You've got contracts, you've got fundraising, you've got people threatening to sue, you've got, all employment issues. The things that are particular to lidar that I was really freaked out about when I first started at Ouster was the idea that I would have a sensor on a self-driving car and the self-driving car would run over, you name your plaintiff.
I teach torts, so please.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the dog, the baby, the mom, the most sympathetic, person or thing you can think of. But what I realized pretty quickly is that there's, hundreds of years or at least, 100 years, you probably know better than I, of law that's really good at apportioning fault when there is a problem like that. And I think that you can rely on that and not try to rewrite that law, because obviously a lot of thought has gone into how to apportion blame and how to apportion liability in situations like that. So one of the biggest things I learned was not to try to shift anything differently than it would be shifted if you actually were doing an analysis in a lawsuit of who should pay for what.
That's interesting. So there's this big debate, and I also teach internet law, this big debate about whether the laws of the physical world actually make sense once we're talking about things that are high-tech or particularly online. Now, LiDAR's not fully online, but as I understand some of the applications, particularly as we get down the road to 5G, where self-driving cars self-drive better if they can talk to each other and talk to the road, et cetera, that is a very online environment mixed with physical. So the ancient law is still serving us well.
I do think it does, and I think that it's. I think you're doing your client a disservice if you try to overwrite that, unless, of course, you're a big guerrilla auto manufacturer who's trying to get your supplier to take all liability for everything, no matter what happens. But the way I always explain it when I'm negotiating is, my sensor is the eye, and the eye isn't telling the car to hit the gas and turn left. Your software is telling the car what to do when my eye sees something. So I can really only be responsible for what I'm seeing, and if I see it wrong, or if my signal comes out of the lidar and tells your software something that isn't there or misses something that is there, then I've got a problem. But otherwise, if my lidar sees a person in the road and your software tells it your car to speed up and aim toward the person, that's really not my problem. It shouldn't be my problem. And I don't even think as a matter of public policy it could be my problem.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
How about you, Pete? What's hitting your desk right now at Twitter? And I should say, for those who listen in a few weeks, we're recording the day after Super Tuesday in the 2020 election cycle.
Don't lead the witness, Jim.
I'm an academic.
Sure, that's fair. No, so well, there's a lot coming across the desk these days. A lot of new, interesting, and fun stuff. We had talked before we started recording about something that you actually were both interested in, and I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is some of the political advertising choices that have been made by some of these platforms. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about Twitter and Google and Facebook. I think this is a really good example because one thing that's tempting to talk about as you sit up here is content moderation. But content moderation should really be its like entire own series of podcasts these days. I don't know that anyone would listen to that, but you could talk for a really long time about it. These are really hard, really cutting edge issues that are only growing in importance online today. And they take a lot of different forms. But this is an interesting example of that, and it kind of boils down a lot of kind of complex principles to a few things. So political advertising, this was perceived as a problem kind of in the immediate aftermath of the 2016 presidential election. And what was the problem? It was thought that there was this practice that candidates had started engaging in, that they were using these online ad services to target very small chunks of the population and run different messages to them. And I'm not talking about like 2 chunks of the population. I'm talking about like hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands. And you are targeting very small groups of people and saying completely different things to them. And I think we can all see why that could be perceived as problematic.
I mean, there's a technological core there, though, that has a bit of truth to it, right? One of the great, whether it's great and good or great and bad, but one of the really revolutionary pieces of the way in which social media and other big online platforms work is the ability to gather enough data to create meaningful but precise and small targeting, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the market cap of any of the 3 companies that I just listed, a significant chunk of it is derived from exactly that. And that's a huge value add. And, we see it as a value add for both our users and our advertisers to be able to deliver more relevant messages to people, to allow the service to remain free. Like, these are things that I view as positive. But so, you apply it in this particular scenario, and it kind of enables politicians to engage in this kind of a tactic, right? And so this was a new thing, and it was widely perceived as a problem. Okay, so we all agree that this is a problem. This is we should do something about this. I can only really speak from the inside from Twitter, but it's safe to say that Twitter and Google and Facebook were all engaged in like a lot of kind of thinking and soul searching about this, because this is a great example of somewhere where we were writing on a blank page. There's no real precedent for how to kind of address this or think about it. But you fast forward to today, and where we are is 3 very different solutions to this. Twitter has decided that the way to solve this problem is by outright banning political ads on the platform right now. And so we've made the decision that you can engage in organic political speech on the platform. In fact, we love it if you would. Maybe not you, but, but, the candidates themselves, that sort of thing, like we really encourage that kind of activity.
And the president.
And the president even, who, yes, I don't know if you knew that, he is on Twitter. It's really great. But no, so what you can't do is engage in paid speech on the platform. We're not going to amplify your message when you give us money.
I imagine you left a fair bit of money on the table when you made that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you my understanding across all 3 of these companies is that it doesn't turn night into day, but it's not nothing. And in fact, not to spoil it, but you can go and you can see how much money is being spent on actually both Google and Facebook right now for political ads in particular. Don't spoil the end of my story, though. Anyway, so you go to Google. What's Google doing? They said, well, the problem is micro-targeting of political ads, so let's get rid of micro-targeting for political ads. So Google will continue to run political ads. They've greatly limited the targeting options that you can use. You can target by things like age and gender, but you can't kind of engage in, this focused on really tight groups of people, whether that's by geography or interest, that sort of thing. They also have, as I just alluded to a minute ago, they've done a great deal around providing transparency around these kinds of ads on their platform. Facebook has taken yet a different strategy than either of the other two. What they're doing is they are continuing to allow this kind of speech on the platform. They are not limiting the targeting options that are available to advertisers at this time. We'll see if that holds. But what they're also doing is they're providing kind of a radical amount of transparency around the political ads that run on their platform. So Google discloses some of this stuff. Facebook discloses more. They are showing you all of the ads that a candidate ran or that a PAC ran, that political advertisers ran, and how they targeted those ads, how much money they put behind the ads. And, this is solving it in a very different way. And you can look at that as kind of empowering consumers and the general public in a way to decide for yourself if you think that they're trying to mislead people or if they're just trying to get their message out a little bit differently.
Let me ask a little bit about how the conversation happens in the sense of what role is the lawyer in-house playing when you're making a hard decision like that? And is it just, what's going to, in the long term, make our customers the happiest and make us the most money? Are there different, broader ethical considerations? And what's the lawyer doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that to focus on this particular example, you are kind of involved at multiple levels. I think the first one and kind of the most practical one is that as all of these alternatives are kind of on the table and, you're in a room just writing ideas up on a whiteboard so you can kind of build this buffet of options that you can then kind of later order off of. You are providing the kind of legal guardrails, kind of okay, if we're going to go down this path, here are the limitations. Like, here is the absolute third rail if we're going to do this that you will not touch. More often than that, it's kind of like hey, this is a risky path because of X, Y, and Z, or doing this particular thing might put you, like Facebook's example, right? Facebook, I just said, has this great transparency. Well, that's going to create some tension with a law like GDPR, which requires that users be able to delete their data, right? And so it creates this immediate tension, and you just need to go into that eyes wide open and understanding how you would deal with an inquisitive regulator or something like that. So that's kind of the most pragmatic level. But when you're working on a problem like this, really the business is just looking for any kind of input you can give them at all, and frequently, I'm sure Myra can attest to this as well, lawyers, in-house lawyers in particular, find themselves in the position of playing the adult in the room, of being the one that says, guys, we got to slow down for just a second here. I know we're all in a big rush. I know we want to get the deal done or we want to get the product out, but we really need to think about the long term. We really need to think about how this fits in with the other activity that the company is engaging in. I will say that the example of the political advertising, everybody in the room seemed to be talking about that kind of stuff. It was really viewed with a kind of long-term vision about what drives the value of a service like Twitter's.
Is the sort of decisions you're making in the physical goods space similar or different? I mean, you're facing liability issues, you're facing publicity issues, you're facing all kinds of regulators.
I don't know. Well, let me just say, first of all, that I think that the problems you're facing at Twitter are super fascinating because I don't have to think about things like that at all, and it must be really interesting.
It is.
In my business, I don't know that I can really make any kind of parallel to what he's talking about. I think what I find the most challenging is that I've worked with really interesting founders. They're brilliant. And they tend, if I tell them, here's the third rail that you won't go past, I spend a good amount of time explaining why they can't go past it. And then they give me a hypothetical about going past it and what would happen if they went past it and how bad is that actually. And, so I spend a lot of time defending any kind of constraint that I'm trying to put on anything.
So not to make you uncomfortable, and you can decline to answer the question, but Pete just said it's hard to be in the position of telling the founders and the CEOs or whomever to slow down. you famously worked with Elon Musk, right?
I did.
Who, it seems to me, just from looking at it entirely from the outside, sort of the paradigmatic hard person to tell to slow down.
Yeah, I don't think I was so young when I was at Tesla that I wouldn't have bothered to tell him to slow down because I wouldn't have known that we ought to. But
well, then generalize it for me.
Yeah.
How do you tell those folks
Yeah.
who are in fact driven to make these new things for us to slow down?
I think it's, telling them anything, be it slow down or anything at all, is a challenge, and you'd better have good reasons, and you'd better be able to step back and let them make the decision they want to make. You can't really direct an Elon Musk. You have to just inform an Elon Musk in the best way that you think you can get him to get on your wavelength, because generally a lawyer and Elon Musk are on very, very different wavelengths. He's probably the most brilliant applied physicist, on Earth, and I know nothing about physics. And so for him to understand where I'm coming from and why I think something is a good idea or not, it's like speaking different languages. And so you try to explain why you feel strongly about something, but you ultimately have to let him make the decision. And, we had a couple of pretty intense conversations where, I felt really strongly about something. I felt strongly that, he was asking me to take a risk that was really a huge threat to the business over something that I just didn't think was important enough to put the business at risk. And he's a very principled guy. So he would just say, no, I'm not going to compromise on this, and I don't care. So it was on me to thread a needle to come up with a way to solve it that would make him satisfied that it was fair. He's very fair. And, not put the business at risk. And it was challenging in that way.
How about you, Pete? How about that work as a translator or threading the needle in the different mindsets or language of the...
Yeah, I think that is, the art of being an in-house attorney is over time, what you're really trying to do is build trust and build credibility with your clients so that when you go to them with the very scary, serious message that, guys, this is the deep end of the pool right here, they're going to take it very seriously. I was thinking while you were talking, Myra, I always think of it when I'm going in with a client who I know is not going to take something well, or who I know is just going to steamroll it anyway. I just like to go in with an exit strategy. You got to go in with this idea that, look, I'm going to explain this to you as best as I can so that you can understand exactly what the risks are. You go into this eyes wide open. Ultimately, it's your choice. I mean, in most companies that I know of, the highest ranking business person outranks the highest ranking lawyer. I mean,
that's right.
Right. And so, that's what this stuff comes down to. They are the ones making these decisions. You are there to enable them to make the best decision that we can as a business. And so that really does mean speaking their language. It means deeply understanding their objectives, their goals, where they're coming from. Because if you don't understand that, then you have no credibility at all, and they're never going to bother.
What do you do to foster your own learning of the technical or business pieces or all of the things that you need to know to be an effective translator, an effective understander, if that's a word, of what's going on in the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I'll be very curious what you have to say about how to learn lidar. But it does not sound easy. But no, I mean, I'm not going to lie. Ad tech is its own extremely complicated thing. I think that the truth is that it takes some time. I remember when I went from the big firm to the startup, I told myself, okay, I got to learn 3 things. I got to learn privacy, I got to learn how to be an in-house lawyer, and I got to learn ad tech. And the ad tech part took me by far the longest. I mean, there are still pieces of being an in-house attorney that you're never going to perfect, right? It's a craft like many things, but it's really complicated stuff. What I think you have to do is be very honest always about what you understand and what you don't. Find people who are willing to take the time and invest in your understanding of this, for their own benefit in the long run, right? But I think that I've always found that an abundance of transparency with clients and being very clear what makes sense to you, what doesn't, really goes a long way. People love to talk about what they do. People love to talk about what they're building. People love to talk about themselves. I mean, look at us. And, so if you go in genuinely inquisitive to your clients and you say, how does this thing work? I just can't begin to understand it. They love to talk about it.
I've found that to be true everywhere except Ouster. If I
Wow.
go and ask a lidar, engineer how something works, it will take a good 5 minutes with maybe 3 engineers for one of them to even figure out what my question is. Because my question is so elementary that one of them will finally go, no, I know what she's asking. She's asking this, and it's incredibly simple compared to the answers that I was getting from the other two that I had no idea what they were talking about. So I can't say I have a deep understanding of lidar, but it just is one of these things where you dive into the environment and you just learn by osmosis because you're around these people. I, unlike Pete, love patents. I was a patent litigator in a former life, so I love being involved in the patent portfolio. And so that has helped me tremendously at both Tesla and Impossible Foods because I actually could figure out what the patents were covering. At Ouster, not so much. I mean, I look at these patents and I have no idea what they're about. None, like zero. So I'm really out of my depth in terms of the tech, I think, at Ouster, but I don't, luckily I have outside patent lawyers who really do understand it and they really help us and do a great job in protecting our IP for me, so that's great. But it really is just diving into this small startup where you've got these brilliant people working on some product that's really cool, and you're just naturally interested in it, and you just pick it up gradually, and you're lucky if you can find somebody that wants to talk to you about it, and you just go from there.
I had a lot of experiences that were more similar to yours than to Pete's when I was a young lawyer trying to figure out how the telephone network was being transitioned to the internet in the 1990s. And what I figured out was there were actually only 4 or 5 engineers who really knew how the whole thing worked. But you get to know them. You do them a favor, they'll do you a favor. Okay, a couple speed round questions. Do you recall good advice that you might have received when you were early on in-house or early on in your tech career?
There's no good advice out there.
No,
I'm just kidding. I think some of the best advice I ever received is not at all specific to being in-house or in tech at all. It was from my dad. He told me a long time ago that he really is strongly of the view that the single most important factor in how happy you're going to be in your job is what your relationship's like with your manager. And, I just think that that's so true. If you've got a good relationship with your manager, with your boss, you're going to have a good time. If you don't, it's going to be tough sledding. And, I think that that's really important as people go out and interview and think about different alternatives. Think about that hiring manager an awful lot because they're going to either make it great or make it rough.
I have a completely different answer, which is probably mundane. But the GC of Tesla had just a very, very, very intense rule that I had to use more than one screen. And I only used my laptop screen. I didn't want an extra screen. And he was like, you have to use the extra screen. And I did, and I can't believe how much more efficient it's made me.
That's amazing. I thought of one more. Okay. This is good. There is good advice. It just takes a little time.
It does.
When I first went to Fleury, my boss told me this on like the second or third day or something. She waited. She didn't want to freak me out on day one. Very thoughtful of her. She was this amazing GC and has been worked at all different kinds of startups for a very long time. And she said to me, you're in-house now, and I got to tell you, being an in-house lawyer is like being an offensive lineman in football. When you do your job, nobody knows. But when the quarterback gets his head taken off, people are all wondering, where the hell was that offensive lineman? And it's a bit of a cynical take, but I think that it captures kind of a lot about being an in-house attorney.
I think it captures a lot about being an attorney, period.
Yeah.
I mean, if everything is going beautifully, they think you're not doing anything.
Right.
But if, anything goes wrong, then what were you doing? So a lot of times you can be taken for granted because they don't know they don't understand what you're protecting the company against. And who wants to bore them to death telling them? You're not going to.
As long as it doesn't happen. It's a good thing.
Exactly.
So last question. You've adverted to this a little bit, but what do you think, if you could sum up what the best parts of your job are right now, what are they?
I cannot, in good faith, sit up here for this long and talk to you guys about this without talking about free food. I have not fed myself breakfast or lunch in 5.5 years. Once you can no longer feed yourself, like your company has you right where they want you.
But you're working from home now.
I'm losing weight already. It's going great. No, I mean that, and I was thinking about this earlier, but I get to work on some really fun, interesting stuff with no obvious solutions, and engage in a lot of kind of unstructured problem solving. And I think that that's just a ton of fun. It's super interesting. It's really hard, and I work with a lot of gifted people to do it, so it's awesome.
And I completely second what you said, and you said it much more articulately than I could. But the thing that I love is working with really, really brilliant people, especially the founders, just look at things in a way that I would never even think of. And it's really refreshing to be around them and say a normal sentence and get a response that you would never even think would be in the realm of possibility on a daily basis. I just feel very, very, very lucky and blessed to be able to be around people who are that gifted and to be able to, help them, make their vision happen. It's just, it's just really inspiring.
Well, I'm really lucky to get to talk to folks like you who've graduated from Northwestern and are doing such really cool things. So thank you for joining me today. And that's our show. I'm contractually required to say if you like what you've heard today, please subscribe to us and rate us. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and a lot of other places. I'm Jim Spetta, signing off from Northwestern's campus in San Francisco. Thank you very much.
If you'd like more information about today's show, please visit law.northwestern.edu/planetlex or LegalTalkNetwork.com. Subscribe via iTunes and RSS. Find both Northwestern Pritzker School of Law and Legal Talk Network on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Or download the free app from Legal Talk Network in Google Play and iTunes. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Northwestern University, Legal Talk Network, or their respective officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.